As you may know, my family and I moved to this area a little over 2 years ago, about 2.5 now. But you may not know that I actually grew up here. I grew up a mile away from this church, in fact, in a little subdivision called Bon Air Terrace. Growing up, I was extremely aware, because my parents were extremely aware, that we were south of the James people. And that meant that we were less than Henrico people. And it meant that we were very different from people in the city. My mom loves to tell the story of when I was 8, we went into the city, across the river for an MCV appointment, and I looked out the car windows and I said, "Mom, what are all these Mormons doing here?" And she said, "They're not Mormons, they're people, you know, in business suits going to work." So we didn't really see people like that. They were all dressed up so nice, except for the nice Mormons who came to see us. My ideas about Richmond evolved from things that I picked up from my parents in school and church and friends, and they involved locking our doors in the car when we drove down certain streets. They involved always being told by my mother when my room was messy that it looked like we lived on 17th Street, and I didn't know what that meant, but it was very bad. I was told and received that the poor people went to MCV and the rich people went to St. Mary's and we went to MCV. And that Cloverleaf Mall was for people like us, and Chesterfield Town Center was for people from Midlothian, and we'd have to dress up if we went there. But most importantly to my mom, even families who struggle financially in Richmond could set aside money to get their birthday cakes from Dot's Bakery. Amen? Yes! I don't remember ever explicitly discussing these things at home. In fact, I very clearly got the message that nice people don't talk about these things. But I did draw conclusions, and a lot of them were faulty. As an aside, this is one of the reasons I think it's really important that you take what you're going to learn in this class and have those conversations at home. Otherwise, your children will reach their own conclusions based on what you're not saying and what the culture is saying. A few weeks ago, Audrey, who is a great truth teller in my life, asked me how I started thinking about issues involving our city. And the truth is that I had not given it a thought until about 2.5 years ago when we were coming back from China. Like many people of our generation, we followed jobs. As I said, we moved from city to city, 5 of them in the United States before we left for China. We had never seen those cities as anything more than a place that we would find a good Bible-believing church and play some Settlers of Catan. We would discover the good restaurants, get in and out of the city. I could not have named the mayor. I could not have told you one issue facing the city council in any of the cities that we lived in. So we were happily moving along with our lives, raising kids, largely ignoring the city that we lived in, when, in 2006, after a few years of dismissing this ever-growing call to China, we decided we had better obey or we were going to end up in the belly of a whale. And so we went to pre-field training. And in pre-field training, we studied the Chinese culture, and we studied language, and we studied the things that were important to the Chinese people. And our missions organization said, you know, you're going to be working in a closed country, you have to be very strategic and intentional about your work, but also about the way you live. I remember a friend who would tease us by saying, you know, you're the people who God had to move 8,000 miles out of your comfort zone in order to hear him tell you about calling. And that turned out to be very true. He did get our attention, and he let us be a part of some really awesome stories, and it was so awesome that I would call it addictive. And when we were coming back to the U.S. After my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's, I was really scared. I was really nervous that we were going to go back to that very comfortable, safe life and forget what we had learned about how to live strategically. In God's providence, we were introduced to an organization called Richmond Christian Leadership Institute almost immediately when we got back. And it's in that place that I met a whole lot of the speakers that I'm going to introduce you to, because they have incredibly changed the way that we interact with this city. Being with RCLI, being with the speakers that I've been with, was what I would like to call pre-field training for Richmond. And happily, no Mandarin language lessons, so yay. What I want to share is that the people I've met were asserting that it had to matter that they were in Richmond because Jesus lived in them. It had to matter that they were here. That they didn't just happen to be here. It wasn't a neutral. They were in fact called in the same way, with the same weight and authority that we were called to live in China for those 3 years. And that there were things that God had set aside for them, giftings, talents, experiences that they had to bring to bear in that place, in this place, in the same way we had in China. And it's interesting because when we decided to leave for China, we sold our house. We left a 6-figure income, his. We gave away our belongings. We said goodbye to friends and family. And everyone in our Christian community said, that makes a lot of sense. That is awesome. You are called to China. Of course that's what you're supposed to do. Now, if we lived that way, with that kind of weight and authority about calling in Richmond, how would our lives look? It's crazy, but I think it's biblical. So in that spirit, you might find it helpful to think of this class as pre-field training for Richmond. Unless you are actively disobeying God about where you're supposed to live, you're here for Him in this city to bring His kingdom to bear. So, with the help of the amazing speakers who have so graciously agreed to come for no money, we're going to study Richmond's hurts and triumphs, its cultures, its subcultures, its places of brokenness, its places of healing. And we're going to ask God to use whatever we have for His glory in this place. And the dirty little secret of missions life overseas is that, in fact, it's quite easy, or at least quite a bit easier, to live that way overseas. It's really hard in your own culture. Every day when you're overseas, you're reminded, hey, you're not from around here. And people expect you to live differently, think differently, prioritize differently. That doesn't happen here. We have to do that for each other. So I want you to look around. This is your community. This is your pre-field training orientation class. You're going to have people who can help you think that way.